Hello everyone, Simon Jacobson here, and welcome to another episode of Meaningful Live. We'll be speaking about what is a mind without a soul. This program is dedicated in honor of Seth and Rivka Weisberg. What is a mind without a soul? Or another way perhaps of phrasing it is, are you book smart or street smart? So, a lot of talk lately about artificial intelligence. Can it replace human beings? So many ways, really, you can ask a question whether a machine does it have a soul? Can you implant a soul in it? If you put all the collective wisdom and experience of including our spiritual experiences, program that into artificial intelligence, will it replicate us? Or is there something that you can never really quantify in a program? Is it simply a series of experiences, number crunching, or is there something more going on? Now, this debate has actually been raging for a long time, whether our spirits, our souls, in the words of Descartes, seeing the soul as an independent entity of our bodies, or, as some say, that's a duality, and the truth is that it's all chemical and mechanical, electrical impulses, and that the soul is just another form of a biological part of who we are. And it's all essentially, yes, a bunch of zeros and ones. Well, I want to introduce a third approach, non-duality, but actually that the very body and even the biological processes of ours are actually part of our spirituality. Based on the principle, for instance, E equals mc squared, that energy and matter are replaceable, it's not that everything is body-like, everything is energy-like. And in some cases, that energy congeals into something that looks like matter, that looks very defined, very deterministic. So in truth is, perhaps everything is just spiritual energy, and the material that we define as being empirical or so on is just an outer layer. In other words, the tip of the iceberg, when the iceberg is far more than that tip. So this goes back to the very discussion. What is consciousness? What is mind? What is soul? So a while back I did a series, which will complement what I'm saying here, called How Consciousness is Born. Where does consciousness come from? And in truth, it's the other way around. You see, we look at life, we begin from what we understand, from what we perceive, our tools. And what are those tools? Those tools are our five senses. What we hear, what we see, what we hear, what we taste, touch, and smell. Then we extrapolate from there, we move forward to things that are perhaps not sensory, but we can perceive. Our minds, our hearts, our emotions. But it's still something that we can measure in some way. But it's not measurable quite the same way. You cannot measure a feeling or an idea the same way you measure the decibels of sounds in our lives, or the way we measure things that we can touch or see, for that matter. So we understand there are realities that we experience not through sensory but through suprasensory tools. And then there are things go beyond that as well. When you go into the world beyond the molecular, you go into the atomic world, or the subatomic and subatomic, or in the language of human anatomy, you go from the limbs and organs into the cellular structures, the DNA, the genetic, and so on. We know we're going to places that are invisible to the naked eye, invisible often even to instruments that we have, and you need to find other ways of measuring it. Classic story with Sir Arthur Eddington, when he was asked, how do you come up with all these bizarre, counterintuitive conclusions in quantum mechanics, in deterministic ones, states of probability, uncertainty, when no one has ever seen with their own, we've never empirically experienced it. And yet, time and again, all experiments show that light can be both a wave and a particle, and that until the observer observes, things are not defined, the classic Schrodinger's cat analogy, etc., etc. And he gave an example of a fisherman who spread his net across all the seas, and began to gather fish of all types of species and colors and sizes and shapes, and documenting them all. Till he finally came to this conclusion, after all of this research, that there are no fish in the sea that are shorter than a half-inch long. And he was about to make this big statement and thought he may win a Nobel Prize for it. Unprecedented statement. Unbelievable innovation, that there are no fish in the sea shorter than a half-inch long. His little daughter hears that he's coming to that conclusion. She says, "Daddy, we have a fish tank that has goldfish that are shorter than a half-inch." And she didn't need any research for that. And of course, when they looked at the net, the ropes of the net were spaced half-inch. So all the fish that were a half-inch or shorter fell back into the sea. So in other words, he should have simply said this: if you use a net with half-inch spaces, you're not going to ever catch fish that are shorter than a half-inch long. But you don't need a wizard for that. You don't need a rocket scientist for that. That's obvious. In other words, the limitation is not the conclusion, it's what instruments you're using. So when we talk about the mind, we talk about the soul, what instruments are we using? If you're going to measure it with a ruler or some other measure, then you'll get what that measure can contain. So what I'm suggesting is, if you want to measure a soul, you need to use a soul to measure it. If you want to measure emotions, you need emotions. You can't measure love with a mind, and you can't measure a mind with love. Everything has its own tools and instruments, and some things, the regular instruments will simply not work. We will need intuition, we will need a sense, a sixth sense, whatever you want to call it. Can it be proven scientifically? Well, just as much as you can prove quantum mechanics scientifically, which means there are many different types of proofs. They're not always visible to the eye proofs, but they're nevertheless real. Nobody's going to question whether you have love in your life. Even though philosophically you can question anything. You can question whether we even exist. Just because I feel I exist doesn't mean I exist. Just because I think doesn't mean I am. Maybe it's all an illusion. Maybe it's a computer program, for that matter. Maybe some larger mind has created the illusion that we exist, let alone the illusion of a soul. You can't disprove it, because any disproof will be you could say, is part of the program. And for that matter, any proof. So you see, you need to know what instruments you're using. So let's bring it back to something more practical, if you wish, and then we'll connect it all together. I remember I was in Boston a number of years ago, and there was someone who used to come to my classes in the city, in New York, and she said to me, I have a brother, he's a genius, computer genius, but he sits home all day, busy with his programs, doesn't have relationships, no social life, he's not dating. Maybe you talk to him. So we went for a walk. Yeah, indeed, a brilliant guy. But emotionally, what should I tell you? 5 years old, 10 years old, I don't know. There was no emotional intelligence at all, not even an awareness for emotions. He says, who needs emotions? I sit with my programs. He recently told me one of his big achievements was that he got these dishes that are able to pick up signals from all over the world. So he literally has 20 screens in his house where he can pick up TV signals from everywhere in the world, and he's going through 8,000 channels. He says, how long it takes me to go through 8,000 channels? It can take a whole day just to go through all of them. And that's what he's so consumed with. And I asked him, are you interested in finding a nice woman in your life, a partner, a relationship? Yeah, it would be good, a nice idea. But now, I don't think there was anything mentally wrong with him, in a sense, clinically. I just think he's escaped into the world of the mind, and it's just safer. I didn't explore childhood traumas or whatever shaped him, but I saw the tragedy of a mind that's not in touch any longer with a heart, and let alone with a soul. And in more subtle and more nuanced ways, I've seen it many times. People who are brilliant and are able to, not only that, they cover up their tracks with their brilliance. They justify anything. And there's no way you can corner them. And not that anyone's interested in cornering them. But you can justify every distorted form of behavior if you're smart enough. And you can, that's what bias and prejudice does. So a mind without a heart, the dissonance, what they call cognitive dissonance, emotional dissonance, a mind without a heart we see very often. I'm not going to say it's exclusively male versus female, even though perhaps more men suffer from cognitive dissonance and disconnect in that way. But regardless, there's the concept where your mind, brain smart, book smart, the IQ is great, but the EQ, emotional quotient, the emotional intelligence is very weak. And that can be because emotional make you vulnerable and you're very protective, you don't want to be hurt. The mind can go to places, no one can hurt you because you have your set of armor, all your defense mechanisms, and the mind is there. But a mind without a soul, maybe one of the best examples would be the Nazi scientists and doctors who had no problem performing experiments on live human beings without anesthesia, who justified it all in the name of science and dismissed gypsies or Jews or anyone they thought were subhuman as being just like animals in a laboratory. In other words, a mind taking over without a conscience, without a soul, without any sense of accountability and humility, and you can justify anything. So we have really grotesque and decadent and obscene manifestations of what a mind without a heart, a mind without a soul can be. Not to take away and dismiss the power of a mind, but it's overrated. A mind is a great computer. It can process, it can develop ideas, it can research. If we only had hearts and no minds, we'd be perhaps very emotional creatures, but we wouldn't be able to find objective truths. We wouldn't know what's right, what's wrong. We wouldn't be able to look at different options. We would be driven by our impulses, by our impulsive emotions. Animals in the wild have intelligence, but their intelligence is controlled by their emotions. If they're hungry, they use their intelligence to search for prey, to hunt, to protect their young, to protect themselves. But survival of the fittest is the key cardinal law. The idea of a soul introduces transcendence, something beyond yourself. And when the mind understands that, then the mind is a tremendous tool of experiencing something beyond yourself. But if the mind becomes I'll call it a weapon, an instrument of your own selfishness, then the mind can be the worst possible force because it will justify it and find explanations. It will justify the most immoral type of behavior. So I'm specifically focusing mind without a soul. Mind without a heart deserves its own conversation, even though there's overlap, but it has many similarities. The point is, it's not just about what the mind can accomplish. So let's think of a computer, even the best computers, and even with artificial intelligence. Yes, you'll definitely be able to program human experiences in there, and it could, I'm sure, simulate and fabricate, and I don't know the right word I want to use is, it can artificially induce a spiritual state, because if enough spiritual experiences are programmed within it, it can replicate that and probably come up with many creative new experiences. But is that truly a soul? Can a machine really transcend itself? Or at the end of the day, it's going to be as good as what was programmed in it, even if you program the concept of transcendence in it. And transcendence includes spontaneity, transcendence includes surprises, transcendence includes mistakes. I know even all that can be programmed, but it's still going to be limited by the programmers, what you put into it. And soul, in real definition of soul, is the ability to experience something that was not put into you, something beyond, even beyond the beyond. And as such, a mind without a soul is a very sad reality. It can be brilliant, it could be right, it can play the best chess game and every mind game possible, but it will not have a life. It will not have a life. It won't have all that is necessary, that is so vital to us, including the mistakes we make, the ability to embrace each other, the ability to be vulnerable, truly vulnerable. Can it be simulated? Perhaps to some extent, but I don't want to speak about artificial intelligence right now, because at the end of the day, if it could be simulated, it's simulating, again, human experiences. It didn't innovate it on its own. It's still coming from somewhere. But on a human level, let me say this to each of us personally. You have a tremendous soul within you. That is your single most important asset. Your soul has faculties. One of those faculties is your mind. Maybe the most powerful faculty, not the other way around. It's not that your mind is discovered a soul, or your mind, some say, is wired to have spirituality in it because that's what we need to survive, or that's part of our dreams, are part of who we have evolved into. It's the other way around. We're spiritual beings on a physical journey. We're spiritual beings on an intellectual, emotional journey. The intellect and the emotions are tools and faculties of your soul. Your soul is something that is indivisible, not defined in terms. Think of it, the indeterministic of indeterministic superconscious states that go beyond even the subatomic and quantum world, and then they're channeled into conscious experiences. And that's where life really plays itself out, the magic of life, the mystique of life. Not everything has to be understood. It's actually quite refreshing to know you can embrace something without understanding it. Understanding is part of controlling it. Understanding is part of processing it or analyzing it, which is important, but that's not where relationships are built. The true, most loving relationships are built on a mystique. That means I don't really own it, I don't understand it, but I embrace it nevertheless. That's part of a mind, part of the soul that goes beyond mind. So mind can be overrated. Obviously we need it because it helps us find objectivity, hopefully. It helps us look at things beyond ourselves before we emotionally commit to them. But at the same time, it's the soul that really is your driving force. So a mind without a soul can take on the worst possible manifestations and ramifications. A mind with a soul allows the mind to express and experience broader horizons. Courage to be able to dare to go to places that your mind on its own may not want to go to, either because of its limited parameters or because it tells you why risk it and so on. But a true mind is the ability to go from the conscious to the superconscious. A mind has that type of humility, that allows it to explore things that are beyond your comfort zone, beyond your routines, beyond your preconceived notions, beyond your wiring, and experience true transcendence. That's what we are seeking. And you'll see so many of the, distortions of Western civilization. Eastern probably as well, but Western civilization is where the mind has become more powerful than the soul. And indeed, it was a result of the duality that once existed, and then science, in a sense, saying we shall replace everything that is spiritual or transcendent. It'll be experienced through science and through reason, and in some way losing the magic of faith, of transcendence, of experiencing something beyond ourselves. And then that became the new religion. When in truth, we have to remember we always remain souls. It's true, there was a time where religion suppressed, and maybe still suppresses many people, and it invokes conformity, it demands forms of closing the mind, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about a soul that's expansive and uses the mind to expand its horizons. So may we all be able to join these two forces, the soul and the mind, or I should put it this way, to allow the soul to shine through your intellect and through your emotions and through your behavior, where you have a full holistic system at work, a spiritual, transcendent, intangible reality that channels into your intellect, into your cognitive, your emotional, and your behavioral instruments and mechanisms. And that will lead to the most meaningful life possible. In our time, especially when there's so much of a lack of leadership, a lack of moral compass, this message could not be more important. Because you see, look at the academic world, its disconnect from so much of morality, where people officially supposed to be in a place that's supposed to be objective, seeking the truth, instead getting involved in politics and getting involved in personalization and demonization and choices that are completely based on biases and prejudices instead of objective observation. This is all part of understanding that we need to re-infuse into our minds and into our hearts a spirituality that transcends our own interests and comes to respect a deeper and higher truth. Because at the end of the day, the mind, the greatest mind, is achieving its ultimate objective when it experiences a truth greater than the person that's conceiving of these ideas, a truth beyond ourselves. That's what the true mind is about. experiencing reality beyond ourselves. And then channeling that back into our personal, emotional, psychological, and intellectual lives. So I hope this was helpful. I hope this shines some light on that conscious, superconscious bridge that we all so elusively, that is so elusive that we all try to seek to bridge, and manifest it in a real life that is not in the words of Bertrand Russell, where he said he could behave unethically because he also teaches mathematics and he's not a triangle, but rather to aspire to be what you teach and to teach what you are, as much as possible, to bridge that dissonance and create a more seamless fusion of our greatest ideals and our behavior and actions on earth. Thank you so much. This has been Simon Jacobson, Meaningful Live. Love to hear your feedback, your thoughts, your comments. Please share, please subscribe, and I look forward to see you soon again. Thank you and be blessed.